that if these favorites of yours would at least properly ponder over this and serve nature honestly in this respect, then perhaps their being self-perfecting might, as a consequence, proceed automatically, even without the participation of their consciousness. And in this case, the poor nature of their ill-fated planet would also not have to puff and blow in order to adapt herself to remain within the common cosmic harmony. But unfortunately for everything existing in the megalocosmos, there is no honesty in your favorites, even in respect of the fulfillment of their duties to nature, not even to that nature to which, strictly speaking, they owe their very existence. As regards the absence of honesty in your favorites in the fulfillment of their duty towards nature, I have just now remembered a very wise sentence of our incomparable teacher Mullah Nasr ad-Din, which in the present case justifies its hidden meaning. He once said, "Plague and cholera are, at any rate, less ignoble than human honesty, since people with a conscience can at least live at peace with them." And so, my dear Hussein, when it appeared that the instinctive need for conscious labor and intentional suffering in order to be able to take in and transmute in themselves the sacred substances abrustonis and helketonis, and thereby to liberate the sacred askokin for the maintenance of the moon and anulios, had finally disappeared from the psyche of your favorites, then great nature herself was constrained to adapt herself to extract this sacred substance by other means, one of which is precisely that periodic terrifying process there of reciprocal destruction. Here, for the correct valuation of your contemporary favorites, it will be apropos to remind you that after the action of the organ Kundabuffer had been destroyed in the three brain beings of your planet, the first generations very soon learned that a certain cosmic substance had to be transformed through them, and that their assistance in this transformation was one of their chief being duties. Do you remember, I have told you, that the beings of the continent Atlantis even considered this being duty of theirs as sacred, and called it Amarlus, which in their language means help to the moon. The three-brain beings of the continent Atlantis of that period, namely the period then called the Samliosian civilization, even devised and very strictly practiced certain customs that greatly contributed to the fulfillment of those being duties as productively as possible. The beings of the continent Atlantis even very wisely and expediently devised the fulfillment of these two being duties, namely the duty of perfecting of their higher bodies and the duty of serving the most great cosmic Trogo-Autoegocrat by uniting them into one and performing them simultaneously. And this union they organized in the following way. In every populated locality, and even in separate districts of these localities, three very substantial, indispensable special buildings were erected there. One for the beings of the male sex was called Agurocrostini. The second building, specially for beings of the female sex, was called Ginekocrostini, and the third for such beings as were then called the middle sex. This sacred building was called Anoroparionikima. The first two of these substantial buildings were then considered sacred by the beings of the continent Atlantis, and these buildings were for them the same as their temples, churches, chapels, and other sacred places are for the contemporary beings of the earth. When I descended for the first time on that planet, and was on the continent Atlantis, I personally visited certain of these buildings, and at the time became very well acquainted with their purpose. In the male temples, namely in the Agurocrostini, beings of the male sex of the given locality, or of the given district, performed in turn corresponding mysteries, while in the special state called self-remembering. The beings of the continent Atlantis had a definite notion that beings of the male sex are sources of active manifestation, and hence in their aguro-crostini, they gave themselves up to active and conscious contemplation the whole time, and in this state performed these corresponding sacred mysteries, so that there should be transubstantiated in them the sacred substances aprustonis and helktonis. And they did this deliberately and with full consciousness, in order that this certain sacred substance, liberated in them, and issuing through their radiations for its further vivifyingness, should become the active part of that sacred law which they call the Holy Trinity. In the sacred gyneko-crostini, built for the beings of the female sex, each of these beings were obliged at certain periods, namely at those periods which contemporary beings called menstruation, to stay without leaving. Moreover, the woman, acknowledging themselves to be passive beings, had to be the whole time of their stay there only passive, in order that the vibrations issuing through their radiations should serve as the passive part of that same sacred law for their further vivifyingness. And hence they passed their whole time in these gyneko-crostini, in a state of complete passivity, trying consciously not to think about anything. With this aim in view, they tried to have no active experiencings during their monthly states, and in order that thoughts flowing by association should not hinder them from concentrating, everything was arranged so that their thoughts should be directed the whole time to wishing well to their present and future children. And as regards the third kind of the beings of that time, which were called anoroparionikima, as I already told you, the beings then called the third sex, for whom these buildings were erected, our Mullah Nasruddin would call misconceptions, or beings who are neither one thing nor another. Among these middle sex beings were beings both of the male sex and the female sex. These were beings who, for various reasons, already lacked the possibility either of perfecting themselves or serving nature. They were, as it is said in a saying of our same Mullah Nasruddin, neither a candle for the angel nor a poker for the devil. Those beings of the male sex were put into these houses for a certain time who, for some reason or other, were already entirely deprived of the possibility of ever consciously contemplating. And of the number of the beings of the female sex, those were placed in them who generally either did not menstruate at all, or in whom menstruation occurred abnormally. Likewise, those who, in the sense of their sexual desire, became transformed at certain periods into, as it is said there, naniomeni, or, as our dear Mullah would say, into veritable mayors in the spring. Among the beings then on the continent Atlantis, conceptions of several definite, very peculiar symptoms were current, according to which the given beings were recognized and confined in the anoroparionikima. And these symptoms were as follows. 1. If a being believed in any kind of balderdash,